So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Hello, and welcome to Trending. It's hard to keep up with all that is trending right now, but in every Catholic home, it is countdown time, and that is trending. It will be as we work our way day by day, 1 week away from Ash Wednesday. 1 week from today, we will be hearing those ancient words of the book of Joel, return to me, and we'll be receiving the ashes on our foreheads. So as the Lord wills, may we approach Lent with great trembling, rending not our garments, but our hearts, and return to the Lord our God. Hello, and welcome to Trending. My name is Brooke Taylor, in for the last time this week today for Timmerie. Grateful and glad to be with you, and looking forward to our conversation with today's guest, Leila Miller. And today on Trending, we're going to a territory that is a bit rocky, not visited that often in common conversation, but ever present in so many of our lives nonetheless. It is the territory of grief after divorce, specifically from the point of view of the child, and the importance of claiming this territory for Christ and how to do that even decades later. So I'm going to give the number right now. It's 1-888-914-9149. That's the number to call. And I want to throw it out there now before we jump in with our time with Leila. If you have any questions about divorce and the stories that she will share, I know will move you. And before we jump in, I also just want to offer a few thoughts in preparation for this 1 week from today as we get ready for Lent 2022. And it's so with me right now because 2 years ago today, we were on the soil of the Holy Land. It was 2020, Ash Wednesday that year was on February 26th. And I was in Galilee making our way to Jericho, then up to Jerusalem. I was co-leading my third pilgrimage and also feeling at that time the walls close around us. We had this outbreak of this virus. We didn't know what it was. I just kept hearing coronavirus. So we arrived in the Holy Land with open buffets, mask-free crowds. Everybody was, kind of sheltered and hoarded in like sheep, and bustling groups because so many people were there in the Holy Land for the beginning of Lent as well. And then by the end of the trip, the world was nearing this global quarantine. Ours was one of the last groups actually out of Palestine before it was locked down. And it's so hard. Do you feel like it's been 2 years? It's so hard to just compute that time going by. But one thing I wanted to share about that experience, that Ash Wednesday, was that year, Ash Wednesday, February 26, 2020, we were blessed to be at the Church of the Transfiguration on Mount Tabor, this beautiful Sugarloaf Mountain where a church sits atop next to Byzantine ruins. And here we ascended the place where Jesus was revealed as the Godhead in such glory that surpasses all imagining. You just feel when you're going up to Mount Tabor, I felt like I'm not going to be able to stand on this holy ground. I might spontaneously combust. It's just too much to take in. And here at the heights, in that particular trip, we recalled the depths, that we are ashes. Our spiritual director, Father John Michael Paul, marking the sign of the cross on our foreheads. What a sublime experience. But the reason that I share this is because, as I have a big lump in my throat conveying this story, is because among the pilgrims receiving the ashes on the forehead were two sisters, Carol and Barb, both in their 60s and white hair, glowing skin. This was their first trip out of the country in their entire lives. Neither woman ever married. They are such a close family. They were caregivers of their mother. She had died a few years prior. And they said, this is it. We are going to go on a journey. We're having an adventure. And so they had dreamed of this all their lives. They got their first passport and off they went. Their suitcases were the old fashioned kind. So they had like the thick handles, no wheels. They were going to the Middle East. And, now we have all these fancy, it spins all the way around these suitcases. And they were duct taped. They were caved in on one side. And you never saw two giddier girls. They were so excited. And so I just remember getting teary-eyed watching them receive those ashes, this overwhelming goodness of God as we received our Lord in communion, as we received the ashes on Mount Tabor. And then 1 year later, on Ash Wednesday 2021, last year, I was attending the calling hours at Carol's funeral. In the middle of the night, in her sleep, she died. She was a nurse. She was a picture of health. So how could we know that Ash Wednesday, on top of Mount of Transfiguration, where the cross was etched on her forehead, that would be her last on earth? And it was a Lent unlike any other in her life. Well, for all of us, I think, for various reasons that year. But she packed her suitcase. She stepped out with great trust and joy into the great unknown, trusting. She was afraid to go to the Middle East, but she was going with someone she loved, and she was going to a place that she trusted Jesus would meet her, and he did. And it was amazing. And so on that church on Mount Tabor, it's just the image that I keep going back to. And I wanted to share that with you and Carol's story. And there are these windows. There are different chapels when you're in this beautiful church on top of the mountain. But there's in the center, in the nave, there's a chapel and stained glass windows with peacocks in the chapel. And that's where Mass was celebrated. And you can't help but see these birds. I'm watching Father John Michael Paul, our spiritual director, and behind him, he's at the altar, there are these peacocks. Did you know in Christian art, peacocks are considered symbols of the resurrection? This symbolism comes from the belief that the flesh of the peacock does not decay. And then the 100 eyes in the peacock's tail, they're sometimes used to symbolize the all-seeing eye of God. And that peacocks are also found in the catacombs. So it's just been a point of reflection. We're 1 week out thinking about it, contemplating, asking, listening, Lord, how can I draw deeper into your heart, have a greater conversion of my own heart, metanoia, and be magnanimous with our lives, to give ourselves to our Lord like the saints did, holding nothing back, not to fear, not to be lukewarm. St. Paul talks about that. We don't want to be half in, but to burn for the love of Christ and to set our homes ablaze and our world around us. So many have grown cold. And I love the prayer. It's St. Alphonsus Liguori, I think. It's the Sacred Heart of Jesus prayer attributed to him. But he says, "Oh, adorable and glorious Savior, consume my heart with that burning fire that ever inflames thy heart." So as a prayer, as you are led up the holy mountain this Lent on Ash Wednesday to Mount Sinai first, right? Because we recommit to the 10 Commandments, and then Mount Tabor as we adore God incarnate, and then finally the hill of Golgotha, the hill of Calvary, where our resurrection was purchased for us, that it is a blessed time for you day by day as you draw closer to Ash Wednesday in this Lent. And you know, in a big way, the topic that we're going to cover on Trending today ties into the idea of ashes, of death, but then also resurrection, if we put in the work. And the book that we're talking about today that I want to focus on is Primal Loss, the now adult children of divorce speak. It's edited by Leila Miller. We'll get into that. And Leila is a Catholic writer and author. She often speaks on issues related to moral theology, church teaching on marriage, family, and human sexuality. So any of those questions on your mind, give us a call, 1-888-914-9149. And her books include Raising Chaste Catholic Men, Practical Advice, Mom to Mom, I love, I recommend. Also, Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues. That should be front and center. Boy, are we facing that every day. And also Primal Loss, the book that we will focus on today, and Impossible Marriages Redeemed. And joining us now is my friend Leila Miller. Welcome to the show, Leila.
Hi, Brooke. It's so great to talk to you again.
You too. Thank you. I'm just reading right now. It looks like we have a caller, and I know we want to jump in, but I also want to hear from Mackenzie. She, it looks like, is calling from Arizona. And Lucas, do we have Mackenzie? Okay. Are you there, Mackenzie?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm so grateful that you called right at the perfect time with Leila here as we discuss her book, Primal Loss. And I just saw a little snippet that you come from a family of divorce. You're dating a man who came from a stable family, and this difficulty of trust, which Leila covers. Well, the people who contributed to Leila's book so beautifully cover and talk about this with great honesty. Leila, this is something I know you've heard and seen a lot before in the stories you collected for your book.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Mackenzie, are you, have you had that discussion with your fiance about the differences in approaching marriage from being a child of divorce and then his being a child of an intact family? Because I find that generally speaking,
Yeah.
people from intact families don't fully understand the stress, perhaps, of people who are coming from divorce when they go to make that vow.
Yes, and we are. He's not my fiance. We are dating, and that's definitely a conversation that we've had. I just don't know how to explain the fact that I don't have a blueprint for healthy relationships because I didn't see that. And so what seems so natural to him is not natural to me, if that makes sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. And I would not have known that before I did my little survey of the children of divorce, because to me, as I've said before, I went to my marriage with a lot of confidence. I had no real concerns. I was not anxiety ridden. I just thought, yep, this is what we're going to do. We're going to definitely have problems along the way, but this is life. And it was never like, there was never a burden or some sort of, complication that was crippling me in any way or worrying me. And I have come to find out that that is not generally the way that children of divorce approach their marriages. And so it was almost a revelation to me to realize how much pain really is involved and how much confusion and just misunderstanding between spouses once they get married and they're from such different backgrounds. And the poor, I feel bad sometimes for the kids from the intact families because they really aren't aware and they don't mean to be insensitive and they kind of might look at their spouse that's really struggling in many different ways and they don't understand why they act the way they do. And this is just key to understanding your spouse. If you're someone from an intact family, we really need to know this about our spouses who are from divorce, and it will go a long way to just healing that rift and making marriage a lot easier for the child of divorce, because you're exactly right. There is no blueprint. You never saw it done. You saw that conflict led to permanent separation and moving on to other romance a lot of times with your parents. So you don't have a blueprint for how to do it, for how to deal with conflict, and for what marriage looks like long-term through all those crosses.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. And I encourage you, please hang on and listen to this show because so much of this we're going to dig into. And actually, you have in chapter 3 an entire chapter about that. It's called View of Marriage. I was just reading one little excerpt. It says, sometimes I feel like I don't know how to be married. If I feel lost, I don't have anyone to talk to about it. I don't have my parents to share the joy of my marriage. My parents did good things in their marriage, and those things I hold on to. It's just not as easy. So often I look for other marriages that are successful, and I take a lot from those couples. I hope and pray that when I marry, I will stay married. And this is the crux of the book, Leila, is you entering into this question and hearing from an overwhelming amount of people who responded anonymously, right, with stories of how divorce impacted them. Tell us a little bit about where this came from, this book.
Right. So as I said, I was sort of oblivious to the world of divorce and the children of divorce until I had a friend who, in the course of normal conversation, she's in her 40s, 6 kids, happily married. She started, or didn't start, I just started to be aware that occasionally she'd have these complications in her life due to her parents' divorce when she was about 6. That confused me because I thought, well, oh gosh, she's dealing with complications, step parents, issues with grandchildren from one part of the family versus the other, dealing with her 2 parents who you always have to walk carefully when there's a divorced couple and who's going to be called first on a holiday or who's going to be invited and all these different things. And I thought, that's a lot of complication and burden that I don't have. And so I started to ask her a little bit about it. And, she was very good at kind of stuffing it a little bit or being non-emotional about it, but you could tell that it's right there under the surface all the time. And so I asked her to write about it. I said, you should write about it. And she never actually did. So I thought I would just throw out some questions off the top of my head and put that out there on social media, my different social media platforms, and ask the adult children of divorce if they'd like to answer my questions anonymously. And I was overwhelmed by how many people wanted to do that. But again, only if it was anonymous, because there's quite a bit of fear of telling the truth. And that's something else, that was shocking to me.
So much to be gained by reading this book. And one of the elements that I've come to recognize that I don't think is talked about nearly enough is grief in general. When we think about bereavement, we automatically think of physical death, which absolutely defines that. But I don't think we realize how many other things that we can be grieving that we may not even recognize, and grieving or maybe never have properly grieved for a lifetime through. We grieve when we have a different way of life, a change, our kids graduating, getting married, gaining weight can be a grief. But also, and we see this in our culture for some reason, a lot of silent grief that for whatever reason we're expected to suffer and not talk about. I think about service members, for example, PTS, post-traumatic stress, 22 service members, veterans a day, take their own life because of the weight of the grief that they're carrying and feeling, in some ways they're not able to unpack that and deal with it. The same thing with law enforcement, first responders, the amount of trauma that they witness and carry. And also in families of divorce, the children of divorce. So that is why when you captured these stories and all the anonymous contributors in Primal Loss, I'm sure it must have been overwhelming, because one of the points I saw in the foreword of your book by Jennifer Robach Morse was, even if children could verbalize their feelings, which they can't, they are afraid, at least in the earlier years, of losing their parents' love. And so they don't want to upset their mom and dad, and they learn to silence themselves. I mean, that is something I guess I never considered either, and how important it is to break that silence.
Yes. So as my good Bishop Olmsted has said in the a blurb of the book, he said, some suffering is not allowed to be called suffering. And so we silence these kids in the first place because they're not allowed to say that it's bad. Interestingly, you're right about the PTSD and the first responders. What's interesting is that in theory, we can understand, wow, they do go through a lot. They go through, real trauma in those experiences. But for the children of divorce, the narrative is completely flipped. The narrative is, oh, it's best for the kids to have gone through this. It's good that the parents did this. Everyone's happier now. And so you can see that a child who has lost his natural right to have a married mother and father, to have that security, to have that as God designed it from the garden, to have that taken away, that kind of a loss, which cannot be articulated if you're small, right? They can't put those feelings into words. But then on top of it, the fear, if you do say something, you could lose your parents' love for all you know, because they're making the right decisions. They're the decision makers. They're the adults in your life, and they supply your food and your shelter and, your education and everything that you need to survive. So they can't put this into words. They know there's something terribly painful and wrong with what's going on. As they grow older, they might manifest in different ways. For example, promiscuity in women, looking for love in all the wrong places, anger in young men because they don't know what to do with those emotions. Nobody's really talking to them about the fact that, this was wrong. What happened to you was an injustice. Either one or both of your parents sinned badly enough that it broke your family. And you had no say in the dismantling of what is a natural right to you. You had no say in it. And now you have to go along with it. And if you say anything against the narrative, again, you could risk losing your parents' love. To the point where we have now these adults, I was just shocked and surprised that in the book, they said, thank you for making this anonymous, because one woman said, I am literally terrified that my parents will find out that I am so damaged, that this is me who's writing this. Because outwardly they'll say, oh yeah, I understand, Mom, I understand, Dad, you had to do this, and I know, no big deal. Many of them are just reeling inside even decades later, and we do not acknowledge it. There's one woman I know, I was on an interview once years ago, and she emailed me, and she was in her late 60s, and she said, I never knew in my entire life that anyone else felt like this. And now there are millions of walking wounded children of divorce out there, millions. She never knew that anyone felt like her, and her parents divorced 50 some years earlier. She never knew anyone felt like her. It's incredible, the silence surrounding this topic.
It is. And I understand, because in my own family just recently, a family member, they got divorced, and it was devastating. It really is. It is a death, and it's a death of a union, of a family, of a future. And in opening the pages, I worried, how would this read? Would this read as a condemnation? And it truly doesn't. I really recommend this book for everyone, but these are folks laying bare their stories, and we know that it's often actually not a mutual decision. And behind every door in every home, there is a story. There are crosses only known to that couple, perhaps, and that family. And that is why these voices, their experiences, are so valuable, because you really do see it all. You see the abandoned spouse, you see abuse, mental illness, the difficulty of navigating that, bipolar, all sorts of different challenges, pride. I mean, we all have pride, but that also, and the dysfunction that was there before the divorce. And this is what I think is so key, that the lie of the devil, you say, that everything will resolve if the union dissolves, and that often, I mean, that's not the case. It just often gets more complicated, such as if you think, you hear the argument about getting an abortion, and now you actually have more complicated issues, and that you have grief, and you're living with this and guilt and the reality of the moral wound that happened. And the same with divorce and the dissolution of a family, that dysfunction doesn't just go away when the pressure valve, quote unquote, is released, but that it continues in a different way.
Well, right. That is the lie of the devil, because you have that instant relief. And I've said before that the arguments for abortion are the same as the arguments for divorce. They are the same. It's a once and done thing. Everybody will be happier in the end. You can try again. It's uncanny that we use the same arguments. Now, that relief that might be felt initially, it comes back. Yeah, it comes back to bite you years and decades down the line. You don't get to mess with God's created order and expect that there's not going to be a consequence to that. I always put it in the caveat that people think, well, you're just saying that every marriage, has to continue no matter what, and what about abuse and all that? And I get that all the time. So let's take care of that right away. Obviously, if there are very difficult situations of danger, of addiction, of mental torture, things like that, canon law says you may physically separate. That is permitted. It absolutely is. If there's danger and delay, you don't even have to ask your bishop, because technically in canon law, you're supposed to, if two couples are, if two people are going to separate, they need to ask their bishop. But that doesn't break the marriage bond. Just because there's a physical separation, that marriage bond remains. So that's what we're talking about. The kids in the book, who are now adults, generally they're just very devastated and upset that the divorce took place in the first place. But in some cases, the children who were of really difficult situations, danger and such, said, I thank my mother, I thank my father for getting me out of danger, for getting us out of danger. And yet, and this is the really important part, that doesn't mean that there wasn't a profound loss anyway. That profound loss still stays with those children, even if it was a necessary separation. So I want to make that really, really clear, because we like to just kind of gloss that over and say, well, it's going to be okay if it was a really hard situation. No, the feelings are the same for the children, whether they were from a very amicable divorce, a good divorce, so to speak, or from a very, very bad divorce, a messy divorce, and a high conflict marriage. So those feelings are pretty much the same regardless of age, regardless of sex, regardless of circumstance. That's what we have to understand. The wound is primal, and there is a loss no matter what, and we need to acknowledge that as a society and individually to the people themselves.
I want to pick up there when we return from the break, what society should know, and also the idea that kids are resilient in their own words, what they have to say. You're listening to Trending. I'm Brooke Taylor in for Timmerie and joined with Leila Miller, 1-888-914-9149. You can call, be a part of the show. More with Leila after the break here on Relevant Radio.
This hour sponsored by Solidarity Health Share. Prices start at $384 a month for families. Call now to see how much you can save. 855-954-5688.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to Trending. My name is Brooke Taylor. Grateful to be with you, guest hosting, filling in here for one more day on Relevant Radio, in for Timmerie, spending time with Leila Miller, editor of the book Primal Loss, the now adult children of divorce speak. 1-888-914-9149 is our number if you'd like to reach out. Martha is on the line from California. Welcome to the show, Martha. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hi, Martha.
My husband wants a divorce, and I think, I know that because he's not changing his mind, and we have adult children. All our children are adult, and I think he thinks, they're adults now, so they'll handle it fine. And he doesn't really think there will be consequences for them.
How long have you been married, Martha?
No, go ahead.
How long have you been married, Martha?
I'm sorry?
How long have you been married?
Oh, for about 30 years.
Okay. Leila, do you want to respond to that?
Yes. First of all, I'm so sorry, and he is mistaken. We have several contributors to the book who were adults when their parents divorced. And I can tell you, and then again for 5 years now, I've spoken to countless adult children of divorce who were adults when their parents got divorced. And I can tell you that the pain is as searing, it's as difficult, and it's sometimes even more confusing and difficult because the entire past history that they've lived through their entire childhood and up through adulthood seems to be gone, have been a lie. And so to take that foundation after all those decades is, I'm not going to say it's more devastating, but I am going to say that people who downplay that and say, the kids are adults now is the time to do it, they have no idea how much pain they're going to cause. And all those complications will kick in, and all of those, all that grief, now in an adult brain, looking back, there's no place to call home anymore. So that's actually a lie. Again, he may not understand that what he's saying is not true, but it is not true.
Mm-hmm. Is that? Are you referring to the Primal Loss book that there's accounts from adult children?
Yes. I would say we've got 70 contributors, and at least 10 or 15, I believe, were adults when their parents divorced. Yes.
Fantastic. I saw where you actually have a free download of the Primal Loss book. And yes. I can't thank you enough. That is so awesome. And I will be sure and print that out.
Thank you.
That's really important to mention. Thank you, Martha.
Yes.
Leila, do you want to mention how people can get a hold of that PDF?
Absolutely. I give it away for free because I don't want anyone not to have access to this information. It's Leila Miller, and that's spelled Leila, Miller.net/Primal Loss PDF. So it's the PDF of Primal Loss, LeilaMiller.net/Primal Loss PDF. You can read the whole thing for free. It's also available on Amazon if you like to have it in your hand. But absolutely it needs to get into the hands of those who need it, who need to be educated as to what divorce really does to children long term. And I really emphasize long term. And really because of how many children don't know that others have felt the way they have, there's a lot of healing just reading other people's words that echo your own experiences. I can't tell you how many times the contributors themselves, once they got the book in their hands, were able to look at it and say, oh, look, here's my entry. And they started reading it, and then they got to the number of who the contributor was, and it wasn't them. And they were shocked because of how similar the feelings are. And nobody knew. Nobody knows.
In the beginning, Martha, we entrust your marriage to the Holy Family. We pray for reconciliation, for healing, for restoration, and all those who are experiencing that. Thank you for your call and your heart. You, in the beginning, Leila, you lay out who this book is for. It's for children of intact families. It's for innocent abandoned spouses who have been divorced against their will. It's for divorced parents who initiated or defend their divorces as right and good. It's for Catholic priests and therapists, for any ministers or counselors who work with those in troubled marriages. And I have to say, I've been blessedly, miraculously, happily married for 22 years. And this book is for my marriage too. I was in tears. I was at band with my son and trying to hold back sobs, reading these stories because you feel the pain. And I put together all the years, even growing up in middle school, a friend who came, and I remember being at my locker and she announced that her parents had split. And I didn't really understand how to compute that and just kind of went on with my day. And what a devastating loss. And so this book is very powerful. And in regards to what society should know, contributor number 32 says this: I want adults in our society to know that divorce affects children profoundly for the rest of their lives. Most parents would never want to do anything to physically handicap their children, yet divorce may well emotionally handicap their children in such a way that forming normal, healthy relational bonds is particularly difficult. Divorce also collapses the normal safety net and security, not just physical, that is necessary for young men to launch out on their life's mission, which involves risks. It helps destroy the bond that is necessary between a father and a son, a bond that enables the son to transition solidly from a boy to a man and all that entails. And also you talk about resiliency. I'm just going to quickly read this one because I think it's so important, Leila. It's number 42. It says, I was not resilient, but I did not know that. I didn't recognize the gaping vacuum I tried to fill throughout my teen years after my parents' divorce. It's only now, in retrospect, that I see all my destructive choices were the result of craving family, while at the same time fearing the fragility of family. I regret the poor choices I made. I mourn the murder of my unborn babies. I didn't know. I didn't realize. My family doesn't know about this. They don't need to. It's not their burden to bear. I recently told my husband that I don't have one truly joyful family memory from my childhood. I did have fun times, but I do not have one meaningful, happy, secure memory. And there are so many stories, all sorts of difference. But how often, Leila, did you find that theme of searching for a healthy identity, especially in light of marriage, with what happened in the experience of being a child of divorce?
Oh, goodness. Over and over again. One woman had this imagery of being an uprooted tree, with the roots dangling from above after her parents got divorced. And, another woman saying that it was like being in an airplane mid-flight where the parents take parachutes and they jump out saying, you'll be fine, but you have no way to navigate or land this plane safely. Terrifying images. And, the identity, they lose their identity. One lady said, I knew who I was when my parents were married. I was a Jones. I was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and I was proud of that. And then all of a sudden, who was I? And what's really interesting, and I'm just going to throw this out there, when you lose your identity, everybody needs an identity, and God gives it to us through our baptism, obviously, but through our families. And we know, even from Scripture, how important lineage and family is and connection like that. When you lose your family and your family tree is just shredded, you're going to look for other forms of family. And today we know very well what the devil has in store for these young kids and teenagers. And that is the family of, the LGBTQ family, the family that will take you in and be kind and loving and accepting of you no matter what. And they will never leave you, and they will never judge you, and they will never abandon you. And we're seeing that a lot today. And a lot of those kids that are going in that direction are children of divorce. And I've seen it happen. I know now too much. I wish I didn't know all that I know about this topic. But so keep that in mind. Kids do need an identity, and they will find it somewhere, or they'll at least try.
We have Caroline on the phone from Chicago, a child of divorce, and just that emotion still remains always. And with us now, Caroline, are you there with Leila and Brooke here?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Welcome to the show. This hits home, it sounds like.
Yeah, it really does. I actually am a child of 2 divorces. So my parents divorced when I was about 4, and then they got back together when I was in my teenage years, and then divorced again recently in my adult life. So to speak to a comment said earlier, I have to say this time around it's a lot harder to deal with, and I definitely think the Holy Spirit led me to tune in this evening to listen to you speak, so thank you. I'm recently married as well, and I feel as though everything that I didn't deal with or have been kind of putting to the side is now coming out in my marriage. So, I'm definitely looking for healing that I haven't been able to find.
Can I recommend a couple of things to you that are completely free? Restoredministry.com is for teens and young adults of divorce. It's founded by a friend of mine who's a young man married who endured divorce, parental divorce. I think he endured 2 parental divorces like you did. And that's Joey Pontarelli. And then, so that's restoredministry.com. And then there's lifegivingwounds.org, lifegivingwounds.org. And they do online retreats that I highly recommend, because I've seen a lot of the therapy or help for children of divorce is mostly garbage, to be honest. It's kind of gaslighting, and it basically says you shouldn't feel the way you're feeling, and if you do, it's just love changes, that type of thing, no big deal. LifeGivingWounds.org, their resources and their retreats are really spiritually based and very healing. So I would suggest those 2 resources for you. I also recently have just completed a chapter in a book that's going to be upcoming from EWTN and Kristalina Everett on the difference between women who are divorced and going into marriage versus women who are from intact families. That might speak to you as well, because you're not alone in trying to navigate a marriage and not really understanding, how to get this done and all the anxiety that entails.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that a lot. And thank you for all that you do.
Oh, God bless you. God bless you. I wish I had known sooner.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for taking the time to call and share, and we'll tuck you in our rosary. The websites, the ministries that you mentioned, Leila, that was restoredministry.com and lifegivingwounds.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, we'll also post that in the show notes as well. Thank you, Lucas. And you have a chapter entitled Speak to Your Parents Then and Now. And maybe you could touch on that, because when it comes to healing and years going by and this grief kind of lodged in there, that is one area that I thought was very hope-filled in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I had, can I tell a story that happened after that had to do with a healing between a parent and a child? An older woman in her 70s emailed me and told me that she had recognized a very similar story to her own with a young man man in his 30s, who was writing about the divorce of his parents when he was 14. And this woman had actually divorced her husband when her son was 14. And just like the man in the book, they had been very close up until that point, the mother and the son. And then the divorce blew apart that relationship, and the sons no longer trusted their mothers, and it was just a very sad situation. And this mother, thankfully, read the book, this similar story to hers, and she said, I realized, this is several years out, and her son was now in his late 30s. I needed to sit down with him, and I needed to apologize, and I needed to not make any excuse whatsoever, which is a lot of what they say. We just want to know that you've what happened hurt us. We know you can't fix it, but at least acknowledge it. So this woman did that, and she sat him down, and he didn't know what she was going to talk about, and she told me that he sat there, and she said, I'm very sorry that I divorced your father. She didn't make up any excuses. She didn't say it's because of this, 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 and this. She said, I should not have taken this from you, and I am so, so very sorry. And she said his whole countenance changed, his face changed, his body language relaxed. She said it was just palpable. And he accepted her apology, and she said, I knew then that I had to take it to my daughters as well. But just that one acknowledgement, I think, does more than, years of therapy that would cost thousands of dollars. And I've heard that from other people. Just the acknowledgement that, yes, something wrong was done, some injustice was done here, and we are sorry as the adults who did that. That goes a long way. So
I think, Leila, that's why it's so important that we are talking about this, because like a lot of things that have just for years gone unspoken of, I think it's not on purpose, perhaps, but then this needs to be something to call out, to bring out into the light of day. And of course, the enemy wants to keep us isolated and in the dark and in that grief. And so this is a grace and a mercy to be able to, as painful as it is, sometimes the most painful and difficult conversations we have are the most healing and the most important. So such an important reminder. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about stories of hope, of breakthrough, of healing and redemption. You're listening to Trending. I'm Brooke Taylor in for Timmery, joined with Leila Miller. 1-888-914-9149 is the number to call. Be a part of the show. We just have less than 15 minutes left now. We could go for days on this topic. I really recommend the book Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. More with Leila after the break here on Relevant Radio.
Today's show is sponsored by Kolbe Academy. With more than 40 years of experience in Catholic home education, Kolbe Academy offers a blend of classical Catholic curriculum and the latest educational technology. More info at relevantradio.com/Kolbe.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmery on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Welcome back to Trending. I'm Brooke Taylor in for Timmery. Leila Miller has collected powerful stories in a book that Bishop Thomas Olmsted says needs to be read, Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. Contributors who have shared their stories of divorce, the impact on their life. And we know that when we surrender our suffering, when we work to heal, God redeems. And that has been a beautiful takeaway in the conclusion of the book of Stories of Hope. We have a few calls. I want to get to those stories of hope. We have just a few minutes left, but I want to make sure that we try to get to Jill. Jill is in Pennsylvania right now. She's been holding for quite a while. Jill, going through a divorce after 40 years of marriage is such a difficult, painful thing. And on the line with us now, are you there, Jill?
Yes, I am. Yes. Well, we're not divorced.
Welcome.
Yet.
You're here with Leila.
I've been fighting for 8 years, and I'm going to go to a hearing. But I can tell you, I have 4 children, grown children, 2 in their 40s and 2 in their 30s. And the one he's high up in the military, this big officer at the Pentagon, he won't stay at my house because he says it's broken. And they don't talk to the children. Don't want to talk to their father. They wish he was dead. I mean, it's terrible. And I was thinking, I'm vision impaired, so I can use the computer. But if I could just maybe find the pages of those who were grown and still, that are grown, that when the divorce happened, I would love to get them to my husband. I don't know if I can. He doesn't communicate. He's so hard-hearted. He's only thinking of himself. But I don't know. I wasn't going to listen tonight, but I think maybe I was supposed to.
Well, in the back of the book, and I'm so sorry, and I'm so devastated for all of you. In the back of the book, the contributors, I give a little, just 1 or 2 sentence demographic. So the ones who are adults can be known by their numbers. Hopefully, maybe I could find a way to get those sorted for you in some way. And you can always reach me at Leila at LeilaMiller.net. And email me, and I'll see if I can get that done for you. But it is devastating. Again, you're right. It's this big, strong, strapping son of yours. He still needs his family, right? We still need what God intended us to have, and there is a grief, and we have to start acknowledging that we live in a society where the fabric of the society has been torn because of divorce. Millions and millions and millions of children who have experienced this, and we just won't talk about it because we want the adults to be happy in their new romance. Usually that's, people move on. So we just got to stop with the silence and start speaking Christ's truth, because he was very clear on divorce, and he was very clear about marriage permanence.
And I think it just shows, again, the strength when I think of Jill, your son, and the amazing man that he is, and thank you for his service as well. Still, that little boy in him, and it isn't like you go through a certain age at the age of 18 and then whatever happens to your mom and dad, you're good to go. It is always there, and as we've seen, and as your book demonstrates over and over again, the reality of that. Our prayers are with you, Jill. And as we just have a few minutes left, I want to offer this word of hope, Leila. It's in the last chapter, one of the last chapters of your book, Stories of Hope, and it just was, my heart was with Jill in reading this. It says, one very important thing is that the battle is not ours to fight. These simple words were given to me. This is from a contributor while praying before the icon of St. Michael the Archangel. I took this to mean for me, it was not in my power to force God's hand or to pray enough rosaries to get what I so desperately wanted and needed. This simple phrase broke my chains and helped me focus on loving my children with greater freedom. I poured myself into my spirituality. Union with Jesus and Mary was my goal, and not for any other reason than any other union. It wasn't about number or frequency anymore, but praying just to the right saint. It was, it says, I experienced so much healing and comfort in knowing that God heard my prayers. Also, there were people that talked about Al-Anon and in truly getting help working, and how God was there in these storms of life. And there was one woman also, Leila, in your book that laid out, I think it was 4 things that helped. She talked about frequenting the sacraments, perseverance in prayer, the grace of hope in the face of failure, and intercessory prayer in every form. And there's so many things we didn't get to today, so many paths to this. It's like this tributary that goes off of this river. But we just, in these final minutes, want to focus on hope. Any takeaways from there that you could offer?
Yes, I don't want anyone to despair, because if we're given a cross, we're going to have it for a reason. It's going to sanctify us. And if we become saints, especially people who've been abandoned, if we become saints, our prayers become more powerful for our loved ones who are in grief and who can't cope maybe as well as, as we can. So we have to cling to Christ. The cross is there for a reason. Embrace it. Don't fight, like this woman was saying in the book that you just read. God is in control of this. We can hand it over to him, and I know so many wonderful children of divorce who are now well-adjusted, lovely people. They're some of my best friends in the world. So we cannot despair for the children. We just have to be aware that suffering is going to come, the cross is going to come. We shouldn't bring it into anyone's life. We shouldn't, our sins, we can't. Divorce is a sin. It is bad. If you are the person that has broken a family, that's not good. So we have to just own what we've done, reconcile if possible, if there's no danger, and we have to always offer our lives to Christ and make sure that we are not contributing to anyone's grief and that we're listening to these children, because these children of divorce have no one that's been listening for a very long time, and it's time for that to end.
You also have a book, Impossible Marriages Redeemed. They didn't end the story in the middle. And I love you talk about the standing for your marriage, fighting for your marriage. But then, like you said, also realizing it's so difficult when one is already gone, and then picking up the pieces. But also the marriages that have been redeemed. There have been some really miraculous marriages that have pulled back from the brink. And that book is available as well, correct?
Yes, that's kind of the follow-up to Primal Loss, so that everyone doesn't get too depressed. And there's about 50 stories of really bad marriages that were redeemed ultimately, and then 15 stories at the very end of standers. And those are the people who heroically, as JP2 has called them, the ones who should be the witnesses, they stand for their vow even if their spouse has left, moved on to another romance. They're going to stand for their marriage. And their kids do better, by the way, than when both parents, go off to new romances.
LeilaMiller.net, that's the best way to find you?
Yes, Leila Miller, Leila, Miller.net, yes.
Okay, the book is Primal Loss. We also have Impossible Marriages Redeemed and so many others. Get the Leila Miller library. I suggest that. Between Made This Way and Raising Chaste Men, there is so many selections to choose from. God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. The contribution of those who took the time to submit stories and you putting this together is incalculable. So thank you for doing it.